On today's show, we have the CEO and founder of 10XTS, Michael Hiles. We are going to discuss the company, team, risk, governance, regulations, and why digital securities are the future and the benefits they have. Stay until the end. Michael is going to tell us his secrets to success in the field. Hello, Michael. Thanks for coming on today. Let's start by giving us some insights into your background prior to 10XTS.
Well, thank you, first of all, for inviting me onto the show. It's always awesome to actually get to have a conversation with somebody that you met several years ago and then have reconnected through mutual friends and, other circumstances. And, so really appreciate the opportunity to talk to your audience, Joe. It's really cool. But so in terms of like my career, I'm kind of getting old, man. I was like jamming to Generation X, the band, before it was actually a demographic label. So, it's like an old school dude, but I started coding on mainframes in 1979. I was an 8-year-old kid. My dad worked for one of the earliest software companies in existence, Cincinnati Computing System, CENTCOM is the name of it. But, that was in an era when most human beings had never even seen a computer. But here I'm a naive kid running around thinking, this is just like commonplace and blah, blah, blah. So then PCs came along and, I figured out I could get paid to code and pretty much set the trajectory of the rest of my life when it came to what I was going to do for a career. And so that's taken me through a lot of technology cycles, starting with mainframe to PCs and PCs to, modems and communication networks and the internet. And, then of course, from there, mobile and social media and, then of course, the later generation technologies that we're all excited about these days, which of course is, decentralized, distributed networks and, distributed data technologies. So it's kind of, my narrative. In terms of like some cool stuff they've done in my career, I've had some firsts. My team won a Smithsonian Laureate Award for being the very first to ever connect a judicial court case management system to a browser so that you could do a case search of your local clerk of courts over the web. And when we did it, we had no idea that no one had ever done it before until the Smithsonian came and knock, knock, knock. Hey, this is pretty cool. Now every court clerk in existence has an online website for a case search, but I spent a long time as an information architect in public records and government systems, and so that also set the stage for another subsequent first. Was we deployed the first biometric device on a judge's bench, so a judge could e-sign a document with a thumbprint. When the state of Ohio enacted their e-signatures act in 2004, it opened up the opportunities to, give judges reprieve from hand cramps of signing, literally bench warrants and documents every day, all day long. So, and if you think about those parallels with some of that, experience in my career, when distributed ledger technology started to come along, we start talking about immutable single sources of truth and, decentralization of data and networks. It was, came down to, well, how do things get onto the blockchain? That's still a big question, right? The provability of what this thing, once it's on the blockchain, it's provable, right? Mathematically, but it's still the oracle function, if you will. And, we saw an emerging opportunity and we formed a company in 2017, 10XTS. And we've been working quietly in the industry. I mean, people are kind of noise. I've not intentionally hidden a lot of things. If you go searching, you'll find out what we've been up to, but, not been necessarily making a lot of big neon sign splash, because we've had specific hypotheses that we've been building towards that are now finally coming through to fruition, and especially in relation to the market and the market's acceptance of that ugly R word, regulation. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
So what was the initial problem that you've seen in the marketplace that prompted you to start 10XTS? And is that still the problem you're solving for today?
Yeah, it really is. I mean, it was the provability of the data itself, when ICOs and, always being an early stage tech guy, deeply immersed in my regional startup ecosystem, ran the Cincinnati chapter of the Founder Institute Startup Accelerator, the Silicon Valley based largest, global pre-seed accelerator. Probably puts more Techstars candidates into Techstars than any other, pre-seed program. But, always being around early stage funding and then seeing like, whoa, there's these open source projects that are figuring out how to run a financing hustle, basically. And, like they're raising all this money as a community from a crowdfunding standpoint around this technology, which is really awesome because you can see then now there's this global paradigm that's coming together where there's cross-jurisdiction, cross-border flow of capital to fund and finance innovation, and to, also, very demonstrative of the pent-up demand of the average person wanting to participate in early stage innovative technologies and transformations that they were passionate about and believed in. which that was a bellwether moment for me that says, the traditional, private equity, venture capital community has, a problem. That was like the canary in the coal mine moment for me was, if this is demonstrative, and even though these things are securities, right, in the
end, but they were offered for expectation of return, right?
If somehow or another we were able to marry the, compliance, the governance risk compliance aspect of that regulated world with the technology shift and the community focus, and where will that inflection point be? And so I had some like orgasmic moments several years ago then when some very early securities token offerings went down, and like, okay, cool, this is validation, like let's keep plodding away. People are like, well, why didn't you get in the space? I said, well, quite frankly, there were an awful lot of, call it progressive form-based token generator software tool companies that could create an ERC20 or variant token for you by selecting some fields. We call those code generators in technology land. They've been around for a long time, right? So you set some switches and some drop downs and click some radio dial buttons and hit generate smart contract, generate token, and boom, out the other end comes a Solidity script that you go and run on the Ethereum network that creates this, token for you, right? Still didn't necessarily complete the story. And that's what we were focused on, was the later stage generation of, okay, I've got an Aspen digital token or whatever. At some point in time, these are going to list and trade on multiple trading exchanges, much like Bitcoin listed on multiple, cryptocurrency exchanges. It's all driven by the same technology underneath. But there's got to be some evidence, if for no other reason, somebody puts out a security that, technology notwithstanding, is a crappy deal on paper, and I'm an investor and I'm mad and I file a lawsuit against the offering sponsor or whatever because it was a garbage deal or whatever, right? Shareholder lawsuits happen irrespective of blockchain. Right? Now, how do I obtain the evidentiary recordation that I need to go into an e-discovery, pre-trial discovery? Because now I've got a financial case, a matter, fraud, whatever on my hands. How do I obtain all of those metadata elements and records necessary to prove that when you say, well, this hash value, this token on this distributed network represents a share of this company? And I always said, okay, cool, prove it. Well, it's in the contracts. Cool. Where are the contracts? Oh, they're at the law firm in their document management system. So that means I have to, abandon the notion of fully automated trust technology and go back to a human-powered process for the verification and the authentication of the claim that you're making at this sort of, hash cryptographic level. To prove that, I've got to go, get the attorney to send me stuff that's in his Outlook inbox, right? Or whatever, wherever they're storing these things. It's not a very efficient process. So that's really what we set about to solve, as knowing that the market would move towards a later understanding of the deeper concepts of governance, risk compliance, information, records management. These are all formal competencies. They've existed for a long time, right? I didn't invent GRC. Kind of came about when Sarbanes-Oxley was real, right? And became a thing. But how do I make all of my governance provable? So I wander around in the industry asking questions like, hey, cool, I love the fact that you have issued or want to issue a digital securities offering. Question, do you have a governance risk compliance policy at the board level that articulates what your policies are, so that in the event of a matter or an action, your directors and officers' insurance will pay off in the event of a court claim against the board?
No.
I bet your token generator solutions provider didn't address that topic with you. Have your counsel call me. So yeah, that's how we got into the space, and I know that covered a lot of ground real fast, but that's where we've been focusing on towards our hypothesis. Still the same, how do we make hash values equally immutably provable as the hash value itself?
All right. So what is, how many people you say how many people are on the team that are kind of executing this plan, and how did you find all those players?
So we've kept the team lean and mean. We're venture backed, venture funded, but we've not raised any serious institutional money to date because it was such an R&D focused, effort so far out from the convergence of the market. So we have about 10 full time on the core software company team, and then of course the bank. Wink, wink. We'll talk about that. They have a separate team. Yeah, it's an independent sister company that came about as a part of this process.
All right, and I guess anything else you'd like to add to what 10XTS is trying to accomplish, or?
Well, we want to create an impact on society because we think more efficient capital markets is ultimately what's going to drive capital efficiency and cost down, as part of market settlements. And so I look at this compression opportunity for costing that's going to just simply improve capital efficiency across the board on a global basis. There's no reason for transactions to cost as much as they do, especially in private equities. And, there's going to be, definitely an ensuing bloodbath in service provider land for these types of capital markets. But then also, it's an interesting quandary because we're very much about economic inclusion and restoring wealth creating opportunities to Main Street, which I think was a big part of the vision of the democratization of capital of the traditional blockchain space, the non-securities, purely technology driven space. And I think that is a worthwhile effort. I think that is very much a needed discussion, how that gets there, and then, will the masses, John and Jane Smith, will they actually engage in these wealth creating opportunities as market, micro wealth generating market participants? There's a lot of debate about, well, you can have all the economic inclusion in the world, but the stark reality is these people are not going to access this, system over here. So that problem, that hypothesis is above my pay grade, by the way. I'm not a sociologist by any stretch of the imagination.
I think a lot of them won't access it unless it's through intermediaries, right? That obviously,
Agreed.
Similar to today's structure, that they put in their capital with some trusted, fiduciary or whatever it may be that's investing in the asset class. Because frankly, I just don't think that everybody wants to and or has the time and desire to learn about all these different asset classes and manage their own capital, right? So when it comes to, improving governance and risk, there are some recent ransomware attacks. And, how can blockchain-based solutions help?
Well, that's, from a technical standpoint, that's, really a roll the hand grenade across the floor kind of a question, because it's going to lead us down a lot of rabbit holes. We could probably talk for an entire podcast series about that particular problem. Ideally, because there's a single source of truth that is auditable, independent of the institution, that allows for the opportunity for very early detection if there's an anomaly in a data set. Right? We've seen instances where highly centralized information systems went compromised yet unreported because of the internal organization's lack of preparedness or willingness to necessarily, get on the stick from a disclosure standpoint, and then of course compounded into other, breach. And I'm talking non-blockchain breaches of data. As I understand it, Poly Network got slammed this morning for 600 million.
Oh, that was Poly with the 600?
Yeah, it was Poly. Yeah, Poly Network. It was 600 million as the current. I think it's going to be the largest, haul in scam city history. So, it is, these things happen, right? It's a big one. 600 million is a lot.
It's the bounty. It's the community's bounty for finding out bugs in these systems, right?
Yeah. What's interesting though is, it's, if you put two and two together, I'm easily identifiable, at least a little L libertarian type, Austrian economics. And you can't be attracted to the space, at least philosophically, without having at least some facet of that philosophical bone in your body somewhere. But it's always interesting to me to engage in the crypto community, which of course there's no one monolithic crypto community. It's like politics, there's varying degrees of blockchain maximalism to, whatever. But when these things happen, for me, it's always a mental countdown to the first, public outcry demands for criminal action. Somebody ought to do something. It's like, wait, you're working fervently to build a system independent of jurisdictional authority. And then the very first place you want to run into when there's a fraud or a hack or something is the freaking police station. And, hey, help me, forgive me if, I'm sort of snickering at the irony here. I'm sorry about your loss, but, this is, this is not alignment. So I don't know if I answered the question actually about what makes it more secure. I mean, obviously, various forms of cryptographic decentralization allow multiple copies of the data to be, reconciled on a near real-time basis. And, do you believe in one form of encryption over another? Do you believe in one form of governance over another from a chain? They all have pros and cons. This is where we get into the amazing opportunity of cryptocurrency is there's no one size fits all, right? I mean, from a technology standpoint, it's, we're actually fairly blockchain agnostic in our products and solutions as a company. We don't really care what your public chain of record is because we're the metadata, we're the sort of the side chain, Oracle layer of, all of the provable metadata that makes this transaction actually mean something to human beings. particularly judges and juries and lawyers, but anyone who goes looking that's authorized, right?
Well, let's try to go into a little bit of detail on that, and just kind of for the listeners, so they could have a better understanding of kind of what role you play in the process, and maybe take some type of example of tokenizing some piece of real estate or something, and kind of give us the start to finish.
Sure. Yeah. So I want to make it clear, we're a governance, risk, and compliance solutions company first and foremost. Now, that manifests itself as tokenization in how we do business, because once the attorneys listen to our approach and what we're doing with a client that's contemplating a securities offering that is designated by a token on a blockchain, which is really what we're talking about when we say token offering, right? Or tokenization. You're tokenizing an asset, but ostensibly it's through a special purpose vehicle or some corporate entity or some instrument that would be, very much denoted as a security under really any jurisdictional view of what constitutes a security. How we track and manage the ownership and possession of that security is kind of, really immaterial. People are really hung up on, oh my God, we got to, custody tokens. I got hit up, this past week because of all the infrastructure bill. Stakeholders, partners, like, oh, what's this going to do to you guys? And nothing. We're the scribes. We're the records management company. So we're the solution that the broker hires, right? Uses. What the piece of paper hanging on the wall says, because the government, gave you the license to do whatever. That's immaterial. You could, manage all this data with a 3-ring binder. Case in point, there are still transfer agents in the securities industry that are, the ultimate say-so in a post-trade settlement process that literally run their back office on 3-ring binders of printouts of handwritten shareholder ownership as a cap table, right? The SEC doesn't specify, well, you must use this form. You have to use an online spreadsheet like Carta. Just for me, I look at Carta and some of these cap table management companies, like, well, gosh, that's just like a fancy Google sheet, ain't it?
Yeah,
I charge you extra money for the macros and the formulas that it contains, but in the end, it's just a spreadsheet, whatever. So yeah, in terms of how we tokenize things, the token becomes a hash value equivalent of the claim that this token object is indeed a stake or an ownership in a securities entity. How do we prove those things? Well, all of the shareholder subscription agreements, the public, the private placement memorandum, the, shareholder, accreditation verification questionnaires, all of the things that go into and constitute the body of evidence, and really it's an iterative body. It's never, one event and then somehow or another that changes. There's this continued iterative body of evidence around the issuance, really the life cycle of a security, whether it's issuant, the generation, call it the genesis event that I go pay a lawyer to, create an entity. And, that's where the conceptual notion of security begins. And then through issuance where I'm handing that out, Joe gets to subscribe in this many shares and blah, 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 blah. And then, now we trade these things and we settle these things and then we report on these things. There's a continuum of the life cycle of a security, independent of whether it's a token or whether it's, a printed certificate, right? Sure. So, for us, it's just a function of correlating all of that boring records management stuff, all of those artifacts. But then we also write to the ledger an immutable event logging around permissioning and governance. So if you, Joe, gets granted permission from a fund manager to go and look at this set of records because you're a limited partner or whatever, the fact that you were granted that permission, that event has immutably logged to the chain. When you go and look at a document and retrieve a particular document that you've been given permission to, I know literally precisely to the second when Joe Robert went and looked at that document. Right. Okay. So now the evidencing and back to the governance and the risk and compliance from a, particularly a regulatory standpoint. Hey, SEC, you want to see like literally everything, chain of custody of information and data and transaction? Click one button. Pretrial discovery is no longer millions of dollars of proposition in the event of a securities fraud case or whatever, right? You've eliminated what is a significant cost in litigation, pretrial discovery.
So can you break down one example of a client that you currently have or had in the past and what role you did for them?
Sure. So we work with funds, private equity funds. We work with corporate issuances, and then we have done a fair amount in, from a fund standpoint in the real estate space. So each of them are somewhat nuanced. Corporate issuances have taken on 506 offerings, as well as, we've got some Reg A offerings. Reg A Plus is sort of taken on a life as a potential avenue towards digitized securities. And so literally we onboard into our platform the body of evidence, the records, right? All of the corporate records, the executed shareholder agreements. It comes down to the provability of a document. And that metadata gets assembled in the Oracle sidechain layer. And then when that entity is ready to generate a public chain designated token, whether that's an Ethereum 1450 or 721. And, once again, it doesn't really matter to us as long as we have the ability to write additional data to the transaction, assuming that the protocol has some capacity to, incorporate a hash value that becomes an index key. It unlocks the sidechain mechanism of all of that body of evidence, whether you're a shareholder, using a shareholder portal, which we build. We build shareholder management portals, not because I'm really hung up and want to be in the shareholder management business, because there's lots of great companies with lots of great platforms out there. It just so happens that that's a really low-hanging fruit, easy way for us to demonstrate really the underlying technology of, well, I'm raising a new fund, I'm onboarding 30, new limited partners. Can this become a form of deal room for me, right? Does this become a form of really the ownership of the data? And we start talking about master data management, which is a category below in the IT space. In enterprise, MDM is subordinate to, the governance risk compliance layer. Just that's more of a board and company policy, procedures manuals with, 1.1.2, 1.1.3. In the event that this happens, the officer will do this, et cetera, et cetera. Master data management falls under that. And that's basically where the IT department, the CIO, is responsible for ensuring the integrity and ownership of an organization's complete volume of data. We went through this back in the migration from enterprise, when companies owned all their iron and had their own data centers internally, and lots of sysadmins running around with RJ45 switch panels in the computer room. And then all of a sudden, the idea was, well, maybe we could just rent someone else's computer and move all that shit out and load our files and information into this magical thing called the cloud. That's cool. Who owns the data? So we went through this whole shift in the industry where we're migrating from on-premise to cloud data. How do companies ensure the management and control and the ownership of their actual data? Now, what's interesting in the capital market space is everybody's got a portal, right? If I want to go raise money as a real estate investor or a real estate offering sponsor on, say, CrowdStreet, for example,
Yep.
And I'm not using, I'm not necessarily picking on them. They're all, everyone's a, equal offender in this particular space. Everybody wants to own and control the data to the point of calling it, well, these are our investors, this is our marketplace, right? Well, that's the problem with marketplaces is they can't, it's hard to serve two masters, the buy side and the sell side of the market both, right? So they're saying, well, these are our investors. We've worked really hard to build this marketing database, and that's what allows you as a sponsor to come in and raise your money, raise your $15 million for your multifamily or whatever. In the end, it comes down to who owns and controls the data. Well, to the unawares real estate guy who's just trying to raise money and close his deal and get his project done, right? The distinctions and the complexities in the bowels of the capital markets ecosystem, they don't know things like, well, there's this form of intermediary called a transfer agent that is authorized under federal law that basically is required by law to get from a exchange or a broker dealer or trading venue any and all settlement data, because they are, of course, the keeper of the cap table. A transaction in securities did not occur until, as I call it, the transfer agent's the proverbial fat lady singing. It's over at that point. I don't care if the bank says this or the broker says this, until that transfer agent says, boom, it's on the book as the official record, the trade is not done. What offering sponsors don't realize is they literally, under the law, can become their own TA1 filed transfer agent. So I can have, 10XTS and then spin up an LLC called 10XTS Investor Services, much like other corporations that are out there, acting as their own transfer agent, and then be mandated to receive from any and all third-party venues that shareholder and that trade settlement data across any issuance portal, any secondary marketplace, et cetera. Our approach has been to be very offering sponsor focused. It's our job to be the advocate for the ownership of any offering sponsor's data as they wander out into this, especially uncharted territory of digital secondary capital markets, the T zeros, the Entoros. And I'm not picking on anybody. But what I can tell you is that because a lot of these companies were born out of traditional Wall Street, even though they have better, more efficient technology, their business practices haven't necessarily also equally evolved to incorporate the culture and the philosophy of what decentralized data actually means. Therefore, it's just a more efficient trading venue. It doesn't mean that you're leveraging decentralized technology, decentralization of capital markets. So I look at it as we're in a way the anti-Bloomberg. We put the offering sponsor into the data business, owning and controlling and managing all of their own data, so that now third-party, rent seekers can't go to all these other places and aggregate this data and then sell it back to you when it was your data to begin with, right? Sorry, Michael, I don't mean to pick. You're really rich, and you could squash me but what's the point of decentralized technology if you're going to behave in a centralized way? I guess.
So I guess a few things. I mean, there's transfer agents and several different things that require licenses and democratizing, investing, and where are we ultimately going, and what's going to stand in the way to democratize investing, but have the right compliance and licensing in place?
Well, when you look at the opportunity in capital markets, we have very inefficient, even at the macro level, we have very inefficient capital markets. Why do we still have T plus 2 days settlement from a trade to the time something settles? Well, what people don't realize is, in particular in the private equity markets, it's T plus 3, T plus 5, because for a private equity transaction, you got to get in your car and drive down to the bank branch and go see the local bank officer who gets out a medallion signature guarantee stamp, the big, huge neon ink chunk square and a chunk, and they sign it, and they affirm that Joe Robert appeared before me. He has the legal right to dispose of these assets in this transaction manner. Please accept my signature as a guarantee of his identity, of who he is and his authenticity. And then you go mail that off to the transfer agent or somewhere, right? So the fact that you have that not only human powered process, but then I got to get in a car and I got to fight traffic and go into a physical bank branch to just simply get an authentication guarantee seems kind of stupid to me, but what do I know? But this is once again, nuances of the opportunities to really change how capital markets operate. The other benefit is really, I can list a security on multiple liquidity pools or trading venues. That's something that's not even being contemplated right now, because no actual security token, I hate the phrase, but that's what at least the crypto industry knows securities as in blockchain world. I just call them digital securities, but whatever. But in the STO land, no actual single issuance is trading on more than a single trading venue. Some of that is because it cuts back to what I was talking about, the legacy behaviors of Wall Street with things like exclusive terms of listing and what? Those kinds of things, right? But eventually the idea is there's going to be the same security will trade on multiple trading venues, which now creates all sorts of other opportunities around arbitrage or best order execution, smart order routing, and you get into really some high frequency trading complexities as the market will mature to now, actually be a true marketplace for, what is now, still a highly liquid form of asset.
Now, is that because is that boiled down to licensing and compliance right now? And that's why these are still all being centralized on all these new startups, like these real estate STO offerings? I mean, like you said, when we first started talking about STOs, it was, hey, it could be freely traded, right? Freely traded, I think was the word, something like that. And now it's like you see a few of these real estate groups that are all tokenizing some type of the real estate stack, but they're only offering those tokens in their centralized website portal login. And it's not the vision that we had. Now, the question, I guess, are they taking the steps right now to get to a point where the vision would like to be?
That's an interesting question. At least in my observation, no. Once again, everybody has a portal. They want you to use their portal because they know that their portal is the path to data nirvana and riches as an interloper, rent-seeking, data landlord. And so whenever I encounter those discussions, and I have, once again, not going to name names in the industry, but there's a fair amount of prevalence. It's interesting because you've observed that as well. And so you've seen this. I asked the simple question, does this mean that if I buy a security through your offering on your portal, that you're guaranteeing me liquidity? Because obviously I don't have any opportunity to move my asset to some other venue for trading. Of course, it's dead silence. Like they don't have an answer to that. Well, no, we're not going to guarantee liquidity. We're going to hire market makers that'll guarantee the liquidity. I'm like, okay, well, clearly you don't understand secondary markets, because market makers can only actually operate when they have more than one liquidity pool that they can arbitrage and trade between. So, this is like a pig and a poke, guys. Come on.
Well, let's hit that real quick, because that's the question. The last 3 years, I think I've asked everybody is like, because I guess when you ask, the whole point of creating a project or a company in the space is to solve a problem. And, when we come to tokenizing real estate, one of the first problems everyone goes, we need liquidity, right? And I go, okay. So after a year or whatever the rule is, you could freely trade it. Who's buying it? How is the liquidity? And, if it's such a small asset, how is that going to be identifiable? And if it's centralized in one login, what are the options? How's there going to be liquidity? And it's kind of no answer. So my question to you is, what do you actually see? What is the problem you see that tokenizing these equity stacks is actually solving?
You're correct in that there is a future tense when it comes to this. I think, God love the STO market kids. They're doing a great job. Kyle Somlin, I think, and Herwig, his buddy, they're real passionate about this segment of the market. And so they're tracking, and if their numbers are to be believed, which I have no reason to doubt the veracity, authenticity of their calculations, but we're at approximately $1 billion in assets that are actively traded in the current secondary market. That's that's literally nothing.
That could be one company, right?
I have 1.3 billion in live fire projects under current development, with another 6 billion in my sales pipe right now. And that's just me. And there's of course other people in the space coming at it from their own way and doing it, progressive form token generator method or whatever they're doing, right? I'd be happy to talk to their compliance officers, by the way. If anybody needs to get a hold of me, I can show you where the dirt and the shorts are at. But in terms of like the emergence of that market, it's going to take a sustained, continued effort. But already I think that people get it. Now the broker-dealer market's waking up to it. And that's a big one. I think if you can find over the next 24 months, say a few dozen, a handful of independent broker dealers that get it and need to, really accelerate their involvement in the digital securities business, and they get it and they understand it, you'll start to see that change rapidly. And if you look at the numbers, already, if, once again, STO market, if their numbers are to be understood and believed, we started with tens of millions of dollars of assets in the securities space at the beginning of 2020. And we closed out the calendar year with like 350 billion or something approximate like that. And now, by third quarter this year, we're already at, $1 billion. So the acceleration on the curve is certainly demonstrative. And I have no reason to believe that that'll slow down at all, knowing that there are applications for new broker dealers based purely on, digital securities. New ATSs are coming online. You can make money as an intermediary in the space again, basically.
Do you ever see, if we think, obviously to the thesis or, of what we like of democratizing, the goal is really to be able to, or at least what people in the crypto space is, they would like to be able to buy assets in a non-KYC fashion or not have to go through accreditation. Do we ever see that even possible with security tokens?
Nope. They're securities.
Yep.
It's like saying, can I go to the vending machine in the Quick Mart and, buy some AAPL out of the, the Apple, the Apple ATM? No, quite frankly, no. I don't ever see securities laws ever because, just in general, it's so intertwined from traditional markets into traditional banking and governance of the currency markets and the currency models. I don't think you're ever going to get past that. If you are going to organize as a legally recognized form of business entity under any jurisdiction, you immediately will be required to conform to that existing ecosystem. I can't say never, but it's not going to necessarily be in my current generational view, right? Maybe when the 15-year-olds who have never known life before Bitcoin grow up and, eventually they're like voting and running for office. And, I can't speak to what the world looks like in, 2060, but it's certainly, I don't see that in the next 10 years. All
right. And I think you guys, I've seen some about XDEX, right?
Yeah, that's our flagship product. That's the Oracle, that's the governance, risk and compliance layer platform.
Does that stand for anything? XDEX or
extended index? It's back to the nerdy library sciences information architecture background that, but interestingly, it also has DEX, which a lot of people associate means decentralized exchange. And I wouldn't necessarily, as part of our integration with third-party trading venues, the fact that we're collecting settled orders into a data model versus actually having deep in the bowels of the system the capability to match orders on the buy side, the sell side. I would not deny that that code functionality exists at present. We're just simply waiting for the right partnerships and opportunities to deploy that level of implementation on the trade side through, market channel partners, licensed ATSs, licensed brokers, et cetera.
And kind of going back to what we were just discussing, some of your clients being funds, are you seeing the benefits of the actual tokenization of these funds, and if it's really needed at this point?
Yeah, I mean, there's a certain benefit to just getting my crap organized as a small fund in particular. Once again, it's managing crap out of your Outlook inbox and various spreadsheets or whatever. Hopefully you got a sophisticated spreadsheet model that you can drop in your monthly up or down or your quarterly up or down for your limited partnership statements, reports. But in general, it's forcing. What's an interesting exercise that we went through was, tokenization works really well when you have a very well-defined unit of account. I have a share, right? But in the legacy world of capital markets, there are a lot of just cash-based limited partnership accounts, and you have a basis in that. You have a pro rata, ownership in that pie, but there's not necessarily a quote-unquote unit. It's just based on dollars, like I threw in at $20,000 and now my current, based on the performance of the fund, that's grown to, 180,000 or whatever, right? There's no you've done that through these unit layers. So tokenization works extremely well for new issuances because I can contemplate into the front end of all my legal on my issuance and my subscription docs and everything, the legal description of the fund is issuing so many units and blah, 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 and describing what that looks like in the operating agreements, et cetera. But how do you onboard and ingest into this digital world, the world of legacy limited partnerships and just purely cash-based accounts? Aha. It's a little bit of a problem when you're dealing primarily in a unit-based ledger methodology. So we've worked to kind of do some cool things inside of that we think is going to really accelerate once the steam starts rolling for the promise of the secondary markets and the promise of that post-trade market infrastructure that's emerging, that it'll be a great path to ingest legacy funds that aren't necessarily unit-based and pull them dragging and screaming into the 21st century. So yeah, as far as the immediate benefit, there's a certain sachet. You're going to appeal to a certain amount of, certain audience, which is massive at this point, right? The fact that you are progressive as a company and as a management team to position your capitalization formation around a digital chassis, that becomes fairly noteworthy. Does that make a difference on your initial issuance? I don't know, because it's what I tell people all the time. The coolest technology in the world is not going to polish your turd of a deal. So if it don't work on paper, there's got to be a good deal underneath it somewhere, right?
Yeah, I'd rather invest with the guy with paper and pencil that makes a profit than the guy who has fancy software that makes a loss, right?
It's all about return here, guys. Don't get lost in the real vision. So, in terms of the time scale for there to really come online and be a thriving secondary market, we're still a little bit away, but there's a lot of money pouring into the infrastructure development of the space. You look at the new entrants into the ATS markets. You got the INXs and the Oasis Pro Markets, Pat Lavecchia and his group. Great folks. Great guys that actually have great attitudes about the tech, and those guys are awesome to work with. But it's coming, right? It's very visibly apparent. I like in my job right now, my role of we've been working towards this point. What they say, the old parable about faith is starting on the staircase when you can't necessarily see the top. And so I'm staring offshore to the horizon and seeing the tidal wave, growing and growing and growing. And I feel the spray hitting my face, and it's coming. It's not here yet, but it's going to hit. And that's why it's even interesting, because people ask, well, don't you guys compete against so-and-so or, this company? You got competition. I'm like, dude, if you're thinking about competition right now and the scale and scope of the global marketplace for all of the potential assets and capital that's going to migrate to a digital chassis, you're definitely misguided in your concerns from a business development standpoint. Instead of worrying about whose competitive matrix is this and I got these, this press release and blah blah blah. That's why we're out there killing it, right? You don't see very many press releases about the clients that were signing on. Oh my gosh, you know why? Because of our GRC focused approach. And I didn't go for the smash and grab on the front end with all the BS of the glitz and glamour of the neon sign ICO and token, technology driven marketplace. I went after the boring conversation that makes the attorneys comfortable. Therefore, we get almost exclusively all of our clients are recommendations from very substantial law firms.
That's good. That's something I've been talking to one of my team members that, he's more on that decentralized side. And I'm like, look, with all these protocols and so forth and the regulations, I was like, the biggest winners will be ones that get the licenses. You know what I mean? Like especially if you're dealing with anything with a U.S. person, people, anything related to having some type of U.S. person, I was like, the winners or protocols are something that can get creative and figure out how to piggy bank and get some type of licensing in place, whether it's under an umbrella or whatever that may be, and a way to KYC, those type of clients under the regulatory bodies will be winners. That's not what people want to hear, but
when you're dealing with securities, and that's what I reminded, don't worry about the technology. We're just like the Keebler L's bound down in the stump, with our cool toys, but in the end, they're securities. And so, the goal for anybody should to not have the U.S. Marshals pound on their door at 4 a.m. on a Sunday morning and, hopefully not shoot your dog, but these are the things that obviously enforcement happens. SEC, the regulatory agencies, if you start to look at their budgets, they're staffing up for enforcement in a big way across the board. We have an administration that's trying to expand. I'm not going to get into the politics of whether I agree with that or not, but there's once again a budgetary expansion underway. Everybody's scrambling for ways to pay for all this, social whatever. Mm-hmm. We're in an environment where enforcement of taxes, security, literally it's all going to come down to revenue collection from a government standpoint. And, it'll be U.S. Marshals show up at your door at 4 a.m., not a GitHub repository of code, because the law is law, code is not law. Right?
I agree. So, so maintaining regulations and compliance, I know you guys also have some type of relationship with Commercium Bank, right?
Yeah. So that's been a really eye-opening experience. There's we've got that was my goal when I started 10XTS was let's go recruit an A-list, really hitter team, not from the crypto space, mind you, necessarily. So we put together and assembled a pretty awesome team over the past several years. Last year, when we were finally ready to move out of pilot and kind of go to market with our platform product suite, that COVID hits, right? Well, what kind of crazy idiot takes a product to market like at the beginning of a pandemic, right? So, well, this is changing how we approach things. And so as we got into it, my colleague, I had brought on former Ohio House of Representatives, a couple of terms in the House, and served as the chair of the Financial Institutions Committee on for the Ohio House, Jonathan Deaver. Jonathan's an attorney and spent time in the regulatory seat as the state regulator on the House side. Brought him in, and we started to really talk about the future of the market. I was really interested in the public affairs side of it. Where's the legislation going? This guy's, an A-lister and can really, move us into DC heavily, really leverage those networks. But then when Wyoming announced that they had, signed the bill into law and that they were open for applications, we started talking about it. Back in 2018, I'm telling all my team, some of my initial investors and my advisors, we just need to go buy a bank. Let's cut to the chase. Let's just go buy a bank. Of course, everybody's like, oh, no, we can't buy a bank because number one, the liability that you're inheriting. And number two, all the regulatory compliance. And I'm like, regulatory compliance? That's what we do. Exactly. But the law wasn't quite there yet. Well, then so we were in the middle of negotiation of acquisition of an existing broker dealer last, very early spring. And it kind of, just hit us that we need to revisit that conversation around a bank. And so we made the decision internally, let's separate teams, because a bank is obviously it's, an independent institution. The expectation from the government and the division is to, gotta have an independent board, and there's very specific rules around voting control and what you can do as a, an interlocked company, because it's very highly irregular that a bank application would be presented as a product of what initially started as a software company, a software startup. Usually it's a bunch of, rich, like Ivy Leaguers sitting around, at the yacht club and, hey, let's go start a bank. And then let's go, hire some techies to come in and build stuff. So it was a very interesting process to work with the state of Wyoming. Very cool. I mean, the most progressive regulators I have ever experience to talk to in my life. And so we started the process of submitting our application last year. We put in our application, got it in just prior to Chris Land was the counsel for the Division of Wyoming's, Wyoming Division of Banking. And he since left. He left at the end of the year to become the counsel and liaison for Senator Cynthia Lummis's office to the Treasury. So he's still around and involved, but, really working with the Division of Banking, our charter application was submitted. We were approved right around just after the first of the year.
How long did that process take?
Well, the application ended up being about, I think it's probably 900 pages. So it took us a better part of a year to write it because, we articulated literally every workflow, process, swim lane, and I went on a rating spree. I went and rated HSBC. Of course, it's been no secret that HSBC US has kind of had some trouble. So I went, had some personal relationships in Chicago, and I went on a bit of a rating spree and as part of my assemblage of a team. And we ended up working with some really top tier global HSBC talent that had recently retired and has opened banks in 20 jurisdictions globally as part of their tenure with HSBC. And so we put together a really compelling application. And then, our application was approved, but due to the statutory rule process of how they schedule hearings, and they only meet once a month as a commission and all those things. We had the hearing was June 29th, and so the bank team and the management team and the board went to Cheyenne. It was basically a court hearing, defend their thesis and present to the bank board, and we just obtained our approval. So it's even taken, about 6 weeks to get our approval, but by unanimous vote, we were approved by the state of Wyoming as the fourth SPDI. I say we because, I take a lot of pride and ownership in having been, sort of the catalyst of the process, but make no mistake, under, 56 Bank Holding Act and control statutes and all that, we're but yet one of many players involved in the bank. So it's very eye-opening. The interesting part of the process was traditionally the division will get an application and then they'll, come and read it and redline it and debate you with things. And, about halfway through the process, I'm like, guys, you're asking us a lot of questions that we don't have answers to. And really it comes down to you as the regulators. How are you going to grade the bank? How are you going to examine the bank? What do you want? This has never been done before. So, and so our thesis actually is very unique. We are focused on a couple of key things, obviously providing cash accounts to crypto related parties under proper KYC AML, but there is a dearth of banking options in the space. If you've attempted to open a bank account for your very basic GPLP crypto fund, even, don't even have crypto. I feel bad for the cryptography guys that actually do crypto software services, because if you try to open a bank account with crypto in your name, the AML department's going to be like, nah, baby, no. So, we've certainly had our rounds in that arena. So cash accounts, payment rails, but then, really ostensibly custody, but custody specifically for digital securities with a very narrow focus and bias around solving that problem.
That custody is for clients, correct? Yeah, or is that for the company's balance sheet?
No, that would be custody for the clients, the investors, anybody owning they are basically the custodian for, their clients that would want to issue securities tokens specifically. They are highly specialized in that particular space with an eye towards this secondary market, capital markets, all of this infrastructure. So it's really interesting when you look at the four SPDIs that are in, now in play in Wyoming. We all have very different hypotheses around the same form of banking charter. And I think it speaks to the wisdom of the division out there and the folks in Wyoming that, 2-3 years ago took a very progressive approach to learning the technology and deliberating and defining, what is a digital asset, right? How do you codify that into law? And then how do we subsequently pass, banking regs around this? And then, even further, they've pushed the window with the DAO, distributed autonomous organization, entity form, and really experimenting with a lot of LLC and entity law in that regard. So, kudos to. But that's also the kind of thing you get done when you only have 500,000 people in the whole state to deal with. It's like the size of Poughkeepsie.
less government can get more things done. That's what we're learning, right?
Imagine that. So, but yeah, so Commercium is, once again, it's an independent, completely independent company, has its own management team, independent board, cap table. But we're really excited because, this represents a great opportunity for folks that we deal with on the GRC side, especially say, hey, have you guys chosen a custody provider, who you're working with on a banking or a custody basis, that more often than not, they might have talked to one or two or, knew of a bank, but have not actually, gone to the extent of solving that problem. And so we were in a position to, really direct, the banking services to a sister partner company. So we're real excited.
Is there any other benefits that, of setting up a SPDI that, the listeners can be aware of? Just kind of what are some other things you can do with that license maybe?
Stable coins. And especially, once again, there's a lot of controversy about what's going to happen in the stablecoin space. In fact, Jeremy Allaire and, now Circle is claiming that they want to pursue a federal OCC charter. And, God knows they've got enough assets under management already in the space. And just to, hey, let's wipe the slate clean for anything that we might have done. Let's just
take any fines, pay them, and move to the next step, right?
Forward, right. So, but it's real interesting when you look at, the central bank digital currency, maybe not. I think it's still an evolutionary discussion, but without question, the private sector is already solving the problem in the form of, in the wildcatter days of the old Wild West banking, it was, bank script, right? I mean, it's like I get this piece of paper and I can go down to the bank and exchange it for a nugget of gold or whatever out of the bank. And that's in a digital form, tantamount to what we're doing now. I deposit, $1,000 into the bank account and they give me $1,000 worth of denominated bank script tokens that may be used in, these other environments.
Well, I mean, it seems like you've done quite a bit over the last few years, right? I mean, between 10XTS, the bank and everything, I mean, not too many people in crypto accomplish as many things or they lose traction. So why don't you kind of, give us, just what has been the secret to your success in the industry and kind of has allowed you to thrive and continue to keep building?
That's a great question. I'm always, it's interesting because as you move through phases of company development as a startup, there's a lot of throw spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks very early on, right? You're in that customer discovery and really market discovery mode. And there's a couple of really danger points that you have to always watch out for, especially in an industry that's filled with incredibly intelligent, creative people. It's the shiny new object syndrome. Squirrel.
NFT.
Whatever, right? Whatever, right? It's like Bored Ape. Cool, But, staying very narrowly linear focused around a fundamental hypothesis and solve. And then, this goes back to when I mentored startups is in the accelerator. You only actually fail when you quit. So reach down, my wife's a trainer, right? And she always is screaming at me because I'm her worst client ever. I'm like old and decrepit and out of shape, drink too much coffee and, whatever. But, she's like, when you feel that burn, you're only at 40%. You still got 60% to go. Don't quit. So, that's a big part of it. And then personally, success is I collect people, man. I surround myself, I'm a student of other people and, human beings. And I love to learn, just I'm just a natural academic, curiosity. And, you can only read, so much. You actually have to get out and interact with folks. And, I collect smart people, that's, I've got childhood friends, that I'm thankfully, because of social media, we live in an era where we can reconnect with all of those people that were really cool in our life that, we, can continue to maintain that connection with. And I got a big network, I got a giant network. And so, I think that you just surround yourself. I want to be the dumbest guy in a room, man. I mean, that's literally it. If I'm the smartest guy in every room, then I'm in the wrong damn rooms. I know that's cliche, but it's so true. I want to be pushed by people and challenged by people. And I feel, it's funny because my chief operating officer, co-founder, Rob Slater, comes out of the military. He's a military officer, senior officer in the Air Force at Air Force Research Laboratory. And, so you got like a literally lieutenant colonel major level guy that's, very comfortable screaming and hollering and being an asshole, right? And I affectionately dubbed him my sergeant at arms, right? And, Slater, military cut jaw, literally, this is Slater like really mad and upset. This is Slater really elated and happy. So, it's like, and so you need that level of sort of even internal intimidation, like, oh, I've got a responsibility to my team. And last thing I want Slater like chewing my ass off because I'm somehow or another dropping the ball on something. So team dynamics is a big one too. It's like literally if you're forming a company or a project, become a master at learning how to build a baseball team. And read the great coaches.
So over the last few years, your success has basically meant that you've created the right partnerships, put together the right team, stayed away from those shiny objects, and kept focus. And top of all that, I think what we heard is, you're doing it in the compliance regulatory fashion and going in the right direction under law.
Under the radar largely, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to go out there and be, neon sign headline seeking. I mean, it certainly helps when you're trying to raise a bunch of institutional capital, but as we've seen, a lot of projects that have created a lot of noise has ended up with an awful lot of crater too. So, it's like, just go do just go build. If you're out there building, you don't have anything to worry about, right? Competition or whatever. People will eventually learn what you're doing and find out about it. Do quality work, always, high touch. Treat people well, man. It's like I teach my kids. If I'm like literally, if I only accomplish two things out of being a dad, right? Number one, understand the fundamental nature of consequence, period, in everything. And number two, don't be an asshole.
Yeah. That's hard these days. That's hard to do these days, huh?
Culture glamorizes asshole culture, right? It's like, yeah. So anyway,
right, that was good. And our final question we always ask on this show, and maybe it piggybacks off that one a little bit, but the biggest thing you have implemented in your life that has helped increase your net worth?
Understanding balance sheet wealth versus income cash, wealth, really understanding the long tail of compounding balance sheet equity value, making investments in things that appreciate over time. I'm pretty austere, I'm pretty low maintenance, and it's great. Like finally coming into my own career, I'm 50 years old. I'm not ostentatious by any stretch of the imagination. I'm too old, like, hey, check out that Aventador. And I'm like, oh, that's nice, but I'm not, like, nice Audi, or whatever. Lexus is fine for, I don't have that emotional need.
It's always available to rent, right? I mean, you can always rent it and get rid of it if you need to get it out. If you need to do it,
That's exactly right. But yeah, that's basically it is, just, keep your overhead low too. It gives you a lot of flexibility. I'm not saying you got to go be, the hermit in the woods, but, debt and overhead is, I don't care what people say. Oh, yeah, it's okay. These are the things that drive me towards success. I'm like, yeah, you got the Buffett side of the equation too, though. That's.
For every person, it's there's certain levels that best works with them, right? And some people can think and work more clearly with less debt, and it allows them to make certain moves that they might not otherwise make.
That's exactly right.
Well, look, I appreciate coming on, Michael. For our listeners, what's the best way for them to get more info, get a hold of you, check out the company?
Yeah. So 10XTS is 10xts.com. And then you can follow me personally. I'm pretty accessible. Twitter at Michael Hiles, MichaelHiles. And I'm also on LinkedIn. Come find me on LinkedIn, the professional networking site.
Where everyone spams messages.
Right, exactly. But, once again, it's about if your hobby is collecting people, that's a good place to do it. So, I'm easy to find.
Well, I appreciate coming out today. I appreciate everything you provided for our listeners.
Right on, man. I hope it was worth the price that they paid to get it all. So, I appreciate you, Joe, and the work that you're doing for your audience, and happy to, avail myself to you anytime.
Thank you. Hey, everyone. Thanks for watching my latest interview. If you like what you saw, please click the subscribe button below to become a member of the Joe Robert community. Be sure to hit the bell to turn on all notifications so you always know when I post a new video. Tell me what you thought about the content in the comments below. I always read them and would love to answer any of your questions.